All right, strap in, everyone. We're diving deep into the life of the one and only Vivien Leigh.
Vivien Leigh, huh?
You bet. You send over her Wikipedia page, and wow, talk about a life full of, well, just about everything.
Yeah, no kidding. She really went through it all, didn't she? Ups, downs, and talent. Oh boy, talent for days.
That's what we're here to uncover, right?
Yeah.
What made her so captivating?
Yeah.
Why is Vivien Leigh the Scarlett O'Hara in our minds?
Good question. I mean, she really is, isn't she? It's like she was born to play the part.
Right, so how do we even begin to unpack a life this big?
Well, I guess we start at the beginning. 1913, Darjeeling, India. That's where it all began for Vivian Mary Hartley.
India, that's not your usual Hollywood starting point.
Nope, not at all. Definitely adds a little something.
Yeah.
You know, a certain something to her story.
For sure. And her mom, Gertrude, she was all about the theater, right?
Oh, absolutely. From the get-go, Gertrude had Vivian performing. Like, seriously young.
3 years old. Little Bo Peep on stage. But Gertrude didn't stop there. She exposed Vivian to all sorts of literature.
Hans Christian Andersen, Greek myths, even Indian folklore.
Wow, the whole shebang. And it wasn't just about acting either. It was about, I don't know, like creating this really curious mind.
Exactly, yeah. That early exposure, the stories, the words, the different cultures, all of it. It had to play a part, right? In shaping how she saw art, how she, I guess, became the artist she was.
Okay, but then at 18, she goes and marries Herbert Lee Holman, a barrister, and acting kind of goes on the back burner.
Right, a barrister.
They even had a daughter, Suzanne. Seems like a whole different path.
But can you imagine, for someone who, practically lived on stage as a kid, that pull, that draw to the theater, hard to resist.
It must have been.
And eventually it brought her back, She even changed her name on the advice of her agent, John Glidden.
To Vivien Leigh.
Yep. He thought Vivian Holman just didn't have that pizzazz, I guess, for showbiz.
Smart move. I mean, Vivien Leigh, that has some drama to it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then, 1935, with that new name, she really breaks out in this play, The Mask of Virtue.
So good that film producer Alexander Korda noticed her.
Big time. But she wasn't quite ready for the big screen, not just yet. Korda moved the play to a bigger theater, and projecting her voice became a real struggle for her.
That's a tough one. And for anyone who hasn't been to a play, projecting your voice, it's not just yelling, right?
No, not at all.
It's this whole technique, controlling your breath, your tone, making sure everyone, even in the back row, can hear you.
Even if you're whispering, that's the trick.
Exactly. Not easy at all.
Especially in a big theater. And even for someone as talented as Leigh, that transition, phew, it wasn't a cakewalk.
And then enter Laurence Olivier, 1935.
Cue the dramatic music. I mean, talk about a turning point for both of them.
This is where things get really interesting, right? They were both married when they met, but after playing lovers in Fire over England...
Sparks flew. Big time.
Undeniable chemistry.
Oh, yeah. And around the same time, Leigh becomes, well, obsessed might be a strong word, but she really set her sights on playing Scarlett O'Hara.
Gone with the Wind, right.
The one and only. And she was so sure of herself. She actually said, "I've cast myself as Scarlett O'Hara." Bold move.
That's not just confidence. That's knowing you're meant for the part.
And then, well, you know the story.
Oh, do I?
Her agent, Myron Selznick, introduces her to his brother, David O. Selznick, the producer of Gone with the Wind. And get this, it's right on the set during the burning of Atlanta scene.
Stop, really?
Flames, smoke, and then out of nowhere, Vivien Leigh. Talk about a grand entrance.
Yeah.
And her agent goes, "Hey, genius, meet your Scarlett O'Hara."
Like something straight out of a movie.
Totally. And against all odds, she got the part. But filming Gone with the Wind, it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Oh, I bet.
Clashes with directors, being away from Olivier, the emotional toll of playing such an intense character.
It had to be tough.
It was. But she pulled through.
Yeah.
And she gave us, well, what many consider one of the most iconic performances ever, right?
Absolutely. To go through all that and still deliver like she did, that's strength. That's dedication.
No doubt. And of course, she wins the Oscar for Best Actress. Becomes a worldwide star.
Overnight sensation. But here's the thing. Vivien Leigh, she never really saw herself as a movie star.
Really?
She actually said being a film star was a false life. Can you believe that? She was an actress through and through. That was it.
Interesting. Especially with all that fame she had.
Right. Shows how she understood the difference, Stardom, that comes and goes, but art, that sticks around.
I see what you mean.
And speaking of art, even with all her Hollywood success, her heart belonged to the stage.
The theater.
Always. She kept performing in plays, taking on all kinds of roles. Shakespeare, Noel Coward, she did it all.
Didn't matter what it was, as long as she could act. That was her thing.
And speaking of Hollywood, we can't forget about the romance brewing alongside all this. 1940, divorces are finalized, and bam, Leigh and Olivier get married. Small ceremony in Santa Barbara, with Katharine Hepburn and Garson Kanin as witnesses.
Now that's a Hollywood story.
Talk about a power couple, right? Ready to take on Hollywood together.
Yeah.
But then, their Broadway production of Romeo and Juliet in 1940.
Oof, yeah. That didn't go so well.
The critics, they were not kind.
And even with their combined star power, it was a flop. A financial one, too.
Tough break.
Tough break for anyone, especially for them. But they bounced back.
They did.
1941, that Hamilton woman.
Leigh is Lady Hamilton, Olivier, Lord Nelson. Doesn't get more British than that.
And it was a hit. Even Winston Churchill loved it. The film. And Vivien, too.
He called her a clinker, which apparently was a good thing coming from Churchill.
High praise. And they became pretty close to him, too. Dinner parties, events, rubbing shoulders with the elite.
Living the high life. But even with all that, there were cracks starting to show.
Yeah, sadly. In 1943, during a tour for the troops in North Africa, Leigh gets sick. Really sick. Turns out it was tuberculosis.
Weeks in the hospital. And then, while filming Caesar and Cleopatra, she loses the baby. Miscarriage.
Awful. And around then, that's when we start to see signs of her mental health struggles.
Right. She starts having these really intense mood swings, what we now know as bipolar disorder.
A tough diagnosis.
Yeah.
And it would have a huge impact on everything. Her life, her career, everything.
Olivier even described it as this deadly, ever-tightening spiral of manic depression. He said it was like she was possessed.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for them.
To see someone you love go through that, it must have been incredibly difficult. But you know what? Even with all that, Leigh was a fighter. She came back in 1946, starred in The Skin of Her Teeth in London. It was a success.
That's amazing.
But her film career hit a bit of a snag because of a Hollywood boycott of British films going on at the time.
Oh, right.
But hey, silver lining. 1947, Olivier is knighted, so now Vivien Leigh is Lady Olivier.
Lady Olivier. Has a nice ring to it.
It does. And in 1948, they go on this massive tour of Australia and New Zealand, 6 whole months, all to raise money for the Old Vic Theatre.
That's dedication.
It was, but it was grueling. Travel, performing every night under constant scrutiny from the press, all while dealing with Leigh's increasingly, unpredictable illness.
Pressure cooker doesn't even begin to describe it.
There were reports of arguments, even a public altercation where Olivier, reportedly slapped Leigh.
Wow. Even the biggest stars, they go through stuff behind closed doors.
They do. By the end of the tour, they were both completely drained. Emotional, physically, everything. Olivier even said he felt like he lost Vivien in Australia.
That's heavy.
But as soon as they got back, they jumped right back into work. West End debut, performing the same plays from the tour.
Back at it again.
Leigh insisted on adding Antigone to the mix. She was drawn to that character, the tragic heroine. You have to wonder if she saw a bit of herself in Antigone,
Yeah, it makes you think. Always pushing herself, always looking for roles that dug deep, that let her explore all those emotions.
And then 1949, she finds it. The role that would really make her a legend. Blanche Dubois and Tennessee Williams, A Streetcar Named Desire.
Wow.
This role, it made her a theatrical powerhouse, but it also came with a huge personal cost.
Yeah. A Streetcar Named Desire. That's a whole other story. A Streetcar Named Desire, huh? Talk about a play that really gets into the messiness of being human. And for Vivien Leigh, with all her intensity and that vulnerability, it almost seems, written for her.
I know what you mean. And she really had to fight for that role, Tennessee Williams himself and the producer, Irene Mayer-Selznick, they saw her in The School for Scandal and Antigone, and that was it. They knew she was their Blanche.
They saw something special.
Absolutely. And Olivier agreed to direct.
Wow. Talk about adding another layer to their relationship. Can you imagine, the energy in those rehearsals?
Must have been electric. But the play itself, it was controversial, right? 1949, you're talking about mental fragility, desire, societal constraints. It caused quite a stir.
Yeah, for sure. This is a time when, certain things just weren't talked about openly. Promiscuity, homosexuality. It was a whole different world.
And for Leigh, with her own struggles, it couldn't have been easy carrying all that weight.
No, I bet not. Plus, the critics, they were the critics. especially in the theater world. Some loved it, some hated it. No Coward thought she was magnificent.
Magnificent.
But then you had guys like J.B. Priestley who thought the whole thing was immoral, both the play and her performance.
Strong reactions either way.
Definitely. Shows how powerful her performance was, to get people that riled up. And then there was Kenneth Tynan.
Oh, Tynan.
Yeah, that guy. He did not hold back. Said British actors were too well-bred to really understand a character like Blanche.
Really?
Yeah, well-bred. His words, not mine.
Ouch. Those words, they sting, especially for someone like Leigh, so sensitive. I mean, it shows you criticism, even when someone says they mean well, it can really do a number on an artist.
Yeah, it can cut deep. But you know what? She didn't let any of it stop her. 326 performances.
326, every night, giving it her all as Blanche Dubois.
And then, the film adaptation in 1951. It just made sense.
Yeah, she was born to play Blanche on stage and on screen.
Exactly. But even with all her success on stage, the transition to film, well, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing.
What happened?
She and Elia Kazan, the director, they butted heads a bit. He wasn't so sure about her at first. He actually had other actresses in mind.
Can you believe?
But Leigh, she was determined. She really wanted this role, and she won him over. Kazan even said later that she had, quote, the greatest determination to excel of any actress I've known, end quote.
And it shows in her performance. She's raw, she's heartbreaking. I mean, it's no wonder she won her second Oscar for that role.
Right.
And a BAFTA. And another New York Film Critics Circle Award.
The awards kept piling up. She was on top of the world.
She was. But success can be a double-edged sword, right?
It can.
She said later that playing Blanche, she said it tipped me over into madness. It's like she gave so much to the role, that line between Vivien and Blanche, it blurred. And it took a piece of her with it.
That's a scary thought, to lose yourself in a role, to have it affect you that deeply.
The power of acting, I guess. But then in 1951, amidst all this, she and Olivier take on this huge project, 2 plays about Cleopatra. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra and Shaw's Caesar and Cleopatra.
Whoa, 2 plays at once.
Yep. They alternated performances every night.
Talk about stamina.
They took it to New York, got mostly good reviews. But guess who pops up again?
Kenneth Tynan.
The one and only. And this time he was even harsher.
Oh, no. What'd he say?
He called her talent mediocre. He even said that she was holding Olivier back.
That's just mean.
I know, right? It's
Yeah.
almost like he had it out for her or something.
Tynan could be a real piece of work. But his words, they hit Leigh hard.
Yeah.
Especially with everything else going on.
It's a reminder that words have power, right?
Hmm.
Especially for someone already struggling.
Absolutely. And then, 1953, she goes to Ceylon to film Elephant Walk with Peter Finch.
Ceylon.
Yeah, now Sri Lanka.
Oh, okay.
And this trip, it really marked a turning point for her.
What happened?
She had a breakdown, a full-blown mental breakdown. They had to send her home. And they replaced her with Elizabeth Taylor in the film.
I can't even imagine the humiliation, the heartbreak.
It was awful. And to make things worse, she told Olivier that she had fallen in love with Peter Finch.
Oh, wow.
And that she'd been having an affair with him.
That must have been devastating for Olivier after everything they'd been through together.
It was. And their marriage, it was already on shaky ground. Leigh's illness, their careers, it was just too much.
Yeah. But even after all that, Leigh, she was resilient. She recovered enough to go back to the stage in 53, starring with Olivier in The Sleeping Prince. And in 55, they did a whole season at Stratford-upon-Avon, doing Twelfth Night, Macbeth, Titus Andronicus. Sold out crowds every night.
A real comeback.
It was. Showed everyone what they were capable of, reminded the world of their talent.
For a minute, it seemed like things were getting better.
They did, but it didn't last. The next year, she was supposed to be in a Noel Coward play, but she got pregnant, and then...
Another miscarriage.
Yeah. Devastating. Her illness, it was like this cycle, these highs and these incredible lows.
It's just brutal.
And it started to affect her work. There was a European tour of Titus Andronicus, and there were, well, reports of outbursts. Directed at Olivier, other people in the company, she just couldn't hide it anymore.
So sad. But, she was still performing. That takes strength. Dedication.
It does, and thankfully she had support. Her first husband, Lee Holman, they stayed close. He was there for her.
Even after the divorce.
Yeah. Real friendship, He was a source of stability for her during a really rough time.
That's great. But, her relationship with Olivier, it was just too damaged.
By 1958, they were drifting apart. Her illness, everything that happened between them, it was just too much.
Yeah. Olivier wrote in his autobiography about this time, he said, quote, "Throughout her possession by that uncannily evil monster, manic depression, She was able to hide it from almost everyone, except me, end quote.
He saw the real her, the woman beneath the surface, and he loved her through it all.
But sometimes, love's not enough.
It's not. And in 1960, after a brief relationship with actor John Merivale, Leigh and Olivier got divorced. The end of an era.
One of Hollywood's greatest love stories, just to leave her.
Olivier said later that leaving her was his biggest regret.
Wow.
That's powerful. Even after everything, their connection, it was real. But, Vivien Leigh's story didn't end there. She had one more act left in her.
An act full of, well, both brilliance and sadness, I guess. So Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier, their story, I mean, what a story. But even after the divorce, after everything they went through, she kept going.
She did. She never stopped, working in film, theater, always pushing herself creatively. And through it all, John Merivale, her new partner, he seems to have been a rock for her.
He was, absolutely. He really understood what she was going through. And he was there for her every step of the way. They even toured together, Australia, New Zealand, Latin America, the whole thing.
Wow, that's a lot of traveling.
It was, from 61 to 62. But for Leigh, it was a good time. Things were stable. She was getting great reviews.
Sounds like she finally found some peace.
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But even then, even with Merivale, she still thought about Olivier.
She did.
She told a journalist, Rady Harris, she said, and I quote, "I would rather have lived a short life with Larry than face a long one without him," end quote.
Wow. That's powerful. Even after all that, their connection, it never really went away, did it?
It's like no matter what happened, there was still this bond between them that just, I don't know, couldn't be broken. But let's move on to 1965. This is when Leigh takes on her last film role in Ship of Fools.
Ship of Fools, huh? Directed by Stanley Kramer.
The one and only.
Thinking about the title now, considering everything going on in her life then, it's kind of fitting, isn't it?
It really is. The film, it's about this group of people, all different, all messed up in their own ways, on a ship to Germany, right before World War II, each of them trying to figure out, what it all means.
Heavy stuff.
It is. And Kramer, the director, he didn't know how sick Leigh was, not at first, but he was impressed by her, her courage taking on a role like that. He said later that she was ill and that the courage to go ahead, the courage to make the film was almost unbelievable.
That's amazing. Even when she wasn't well, she still gave it everything she had.
That was Vivien Leigh. But the filming, it was rough. There were times when she was paranoid, she had outbursts, it was hard on everyone.
Her illness was really taking its toll.
Yeah. It's just sad, to see someone so talented, so full of life, to see her struggling like that. But she still delivered a great performance.
She did. She even won a L'Étoile de Cristal for it.
That's the French equivalent of an Oscar.
Wow, that's incredible. Even with everything she was going through, she still had that spark, that ability to really move people.
She did. But that was her last film. In May of 67, she was rehearsing for a play with Michael Redgrave, and the tuberculosis came back. Hit her hard this time.
Oh, no.
And just a few weeks later, July 8th, 1967, she was gone.
53 years old. Way too young.
Way too young. A huge loss for the world of theater and film. All the theaters in London's West End, they dimmed their lights for an hour.
A tribute to a star gone too soon.
It was beautiful. Her funeral, it was packed. Everyone was there, the biggest names in British theater and film. John Gielgud gave the eulogy.
And Olivier?
He was there too. Even though he was in the hospital himself, fighting prostate cancer, had to say goodbye to his former love.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
Olivier, he wrote later about how heartbroken he was, about the grievous anguish of losing her. He even said he stood and prayed for forgiveness for all the evils that had sprung up between us.
That's love, isn't it? Even after everything, the love was still there.
It was. They scattered her ashes on the lake at her summer home, Tickeridge Mill. They held memorials in London, in Los Angeles. People were heartbroken all over the world.
And her legacy, well, it's still going strong, isn't it? New generations discover her, watch her films, and they're blown away. Especially Scarlett O'Hara. I mean, that performance, it's timeless.
She's an icon. But that's a shame, Her beauty, it sometimes overshadowed her talent. Even Olivier said that people, especially critics, they were so focused on how she looked that they didn't always see how good of an actress she really was.
I bet that was frustrating.
It was. She knew it too. She always tried to find roles that were different, that challenged her, just to prove that she was more than just a pretty face. She once said, "People think that if you look fairly reasonable, you can't possibly act. And as I only care about acting, I think beauty can be a great handicap.
She had a point. So, after this deep dive into Vivien Leigh's life, what have we learned?
It's a reminder that even the brightest stars, they have their struggles. Mental health, it's real, it's serious, and we have to be there for people who are going through
I
it.
do.
And Vivien Leigh, she was resilient, dedicated to her craft no matter what. She was a true artist, a gifted one, and her work, her impact on the world, it's still felt today. Her story is proof that even when life throws you curveballs, you can still create something beautiful, something lasting.
Absolutely.
But it also makes you wonder, how would her life, her career have been different if she had the help she needed? The mental health resources we have now, it's a question worth thinking about.
It is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and work of Vivien Leigh. It's been a journey, that's for sure. We encourage you to keep exploring her story, read more about her, watch her films, and form your own conclusions. Until next time.
Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.